All right, so the new dietary guidelines have now just been released, and there are significant changes to what was previously the dietary national policy. And I'm going to discuss some of the winners and some of the losers, some of the things that I think are going to be very important going forward, and how to think about nutrition, how we think about feeding this country in general. Okay, let's start with the introductory document. It's a 10-page summary statement, and effectively this is the dietary guidelines, and it has a tremendous emphasis on real, whole, unprocessed foods. Now, this document is signed by HS Secretary Robert F. Kennedy, and of course the USDA Secretary Brooke Rollins. Now, the emphasis is on, as I said, whole, unrefined foods, minimizing or eliminating ultra-processed food, which I think is a good thing in general. They focus on protein. They've increased significantly the protein recommendations, basically doubling the former RDA of 0.8 grams per kilogram to up to 1.6, so anywhere between 1.2 and 1.6 grams of protein a day for a healthy adult. And that is in line with what most of the research would indicate is appropriate for maintaining and building lean mass, which is critically important for overall health, metabolic health, function, and so on and so forth, and disease resilience. They dramatically reduce the recommendations for added sugar, significantly reducing that. I think going from 10% down to 2%. They cut back dramatically refined grain products significantly, which again is a good thing. They emphasize including meat at every meal, basically, or a strong amount of protein at every meal. Include meat coming from things like red meat, eggs, dairy products, seafood, of course, and I think that is generally a big win. There is also a interesting several sets of carve-outs there. There is some different recommendations for younger populations, which I think are kind of in line with this, continuing heavy on the protein, high quality fats, things of that nature. I think one of the things that is really important is a carve out for chronic disease, to include the inclusion of low carb diets as a means to mitigate that. I think that is a huge win. I think that's incredibly important. I think, again, we have to realize this is a dietary guidelines for the whole country. Not everybody's on a carnivore diet, not everybody's on a ketogenic diet, but I think in general this is a very good pattern. Now, are there any particular areas where I think they still have some problems with? And I think the biggest one, and this is something that for those of you that are familiar with Nina Teicholz, author of The Big Fat Surprise, who has been crusading for changes in the dietary guidelines for at least a decade now, and hats off for her for having, I think, some impact on this. I know they involve a number of people in the low carb community who previously had not been given much of a voice to help shape these guidelines. And I think these are fair guidelines for the majority of people. Now, the one issue that I think a lot of people in the low carb, particularly ketogenic and carnivore community, will have issue with is the fact that they left a saturated fat cap of no more than 10% of your calories coming from saturated fat. So that makes it challenging to eat, some of these other recommendations to include, eggs and red meat and things like that, because as we know, meat has a higher amount of saturated fat than some of these other foods. So that is sort of a difficult sort of exception to reconcile, and maybe there'll be some further clarity on that. But right now, it seems like there are two disparate messages. If you read the overall summary, it says, hey, eat meat, eat eggs, eat dairy, particularly whole milk dairy or whole fat dairy, and yet there's this sort of hidden, in a deeper layer about this remaining 10% saturated fat cap, which is hard to reconcile. And if we look at who that impacts, if the average person just takes the face value, eat real food, include as much meat, milk, and eggs as you feel like, get your protein in, limit ultra-processed food, so on and so forth, I think that's generally pretty good advice. And again, there's recommendations to eat fruits and vegetables, and I think that's fine for the average person. Again, when we're talking about sick people, I think we have a little bit different discussion. But at the same time, when we are feeding federally funded entities like many schools, like military, like hospital systems that take federal money and so on and so forth, we still have this sort of one little issue with the saturated fat thing. I think it is a start. I think it is a welcome change. And I think, hats off to all that are involved. And I know RFK and Secretary Rollins are going to get, a lot of the credit here, but there's a lot of people behind the scenes that certainly deserve that. My friend Ben Bickman announced that he was part of that, advisory panel, and others that you guys probably know have been involved in this. And as I've been pushing for years, the one thing that I will say that I really appreciate is I've said many, many times that our dietary guidelines should resemble more of what like Brazil has done. And Brazil basically says just eat unprocessed food, cook at home, use whole food ingredients, so on and so forth. And this very much mimics that. So I think that's a good deal to not overly complicate things and to just say, hey, let's stop eating this ultra processed garbage. Let's focus on whole unprocessed foods. And I think undoubtedly that message is a sorely needed message. All right, guys, let me know what you think in the comments about the dietary guidelines. I think it is a win for the country. I don't think it's it's everything that I would have liked to have seen in there, but it is most of it, quite honestly. And I think this will continue to evolve over time. Hopefully, this will hopefully invigorate the cattle industry. Because I think this is saying, hey, red meat is on the menu again, and I think that's a very important message there. I know Secretary Rollins has stated that she wants to support those ranchers that are critical. They are literally a national security interest that we have, that we maintain that wonderful source of nutrition that we have. And again, you have to sort of feed everybody else that may not want to go carnivore, and I certainly get that and understand that. So overall, I think thumbs up on the effort. I think obviously more to come, and I think it's incumbent upon us to continue to strive for research that will continue to maybe question that saturated fat cap. I think that is something that still needs to happen and is happening, and I'm aware of studies that are being rolled out that hopefully will start to push back on that. Support organizations like what we're doing at Revero that are designed to help people, to empower people to fix this stuff. We are reversing disease on a daily basis. We're getting people healthy so that they can progress to these types of things. And I have meetings with all of the Revero patients, basically once or twice a week to talk about some of this stuff. Our physicians are trained in this stuff. They want to get to the root cause. Their goal is to get you off medication. All right, guys, you have a wonderful day. Let me know what you think in the comments. Thanks for being a listener of this channel. Subscribe, like, all those good things, and have a great, wonderful 2026.